Okay, hello and welcome to the ADHD Goals Podcast. I have another fantastic guest lined up for you today. His name is Dave Thompson. He is the Director of Strategic Programs at Potentia Workforce. He has ADHD, dyslexia, and sensory processing issues. And quite excitingly for me, I'm a bit of a TED Talk fan. And I saw Dave's TEDx on the topic of rebranding the brain, neurodiversity at work. And I was very excited when he agreed to chat to me. So welcome to the show, Dave. How are you today?
Thank you so much. I'm good now that I'm on with you. I'm thoroughly stoked to chat with you and appreciate the kind intro. Thank you.
You're welcome. So for the benefit of the listeners, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your own personal journey and how it has got you here today? Not necessarily here today on the interview, but to what you do generally.
It all lines up here. Yeah. Thank you so much. So I think that's a great place to start. My story is a little bit different from yours in that I was diagnosed with ADHD and dyslexia at 5 years old as soon as I started kindergarten. And so my adolescent, my childhood and adolescent experience was kind of marred with being raised through that lens of like perceived inabilities. And frankly, I was left out of a lot of opportunity because of it. So I was in special education classes in a separate class from my peers. And, times have changed. Things have gotten better within education. They're certainly not perfect. But again, kind of counted out, and not given the supports I needed to show people what my strengths were, what my unique perspectives were, how to mitigate my challenges, right? And so that really affected me. And that continued into adulthood, into college. Failed my driver's test 4 times. I have really bad directional confusion, so I actually now have my left and my right tattooed on my hands, which I always like to show off, which is fashion and function. And for the listener, I'm showing Laurence my hands, which have purple American traditional tattoos of a capital R and a capital L. I dropped out of college 3 or so times, just floundered and struggled to find my direction. And I knew I wanted to help people. I knew I wanted to kind of improve the world and the world of work. It was very general. So I ended up in human services supporting people in various populations, whether that be autistic teens and young adults or teenagers in the New York City juvenile justice system and foster care system, many of whom were neurodivergent. And I really wasn't looking at this through, I'm going to be good at this because of my brain. It wasn't until I kind of discovered the neurodiversity movement and applied that to the world of work that I realized the reason why I was good at supporting individuals at work and supporting companies in figuring out how to be more neuro-inclusive, kind of before that was a word, right? Was because of my brain and not in spite of it. And so I took that and ran with it, started working with small nonprofit businesses with the mission of improving employment outcomes and providing employment opportunities to ND thinkers, and took that from there. To fast forward a bit, realized that with those mission-driven companies that exist solely with the idea of employing ND job seekers, with that knowledge, realized that stuff was valuable to apply on a larger scale to some of the biggest corporations in the world. So was able to get on the phone, me with imposter syndrome and, feeling like I'd never apply to a Fortune 500 company. I was able to get on the phone with companies like Microsoft, who said, yeah, you might have some stuff to gain from us, but we have a lot to gain from you too. And that was very, very motivating to me. And so through that, transitioned over a couple of years into helping some of the largest corporations in the world become more neuro-inclusive through training, which I have a passion for speaking and training, facilitating workshops and things like that, through process consulting, through proactive recruiting programs to get ND job seekers into these companies after making sure that they're kind of walking the walk, and through coaching not just ND professionals at companies, but managers and teams on how to move forward through this lens of neurodiversity and inclusion. So that's kind of my life story.
Well, there's a few things that I want to sort of dig into there, and what one goes back to the sort of the very first thing that you said, which was how sort of we've had two different approaches to understanding ADHD, just purely from the fact that you found out when you were 5 years old, and I found out when I was 40 years old, 41. And a question has come up, or something that I've run into a few times recently with parents, maybe neurotypical parents that are sensing that their children are neurodivergent, and they have this, I would say they're little bit scared of this word labeling a child with ADHD, and there's two factors in that. There's one parent is scared of labeling their child as ADHD and what that might do to their perception of themselves and other people's perception of them, like putting them into a box, if you like, and saying, well, this is what you're capable of. And then there was another parent that was who had, the child's more in their teenage years and quite struggling at the moment, but was worried about labeling them with ADHD or them knowing too much about ADHD in case they started to then use that as a way of saying, oh, I'm not doing this, I can't, it's my ADHD. But it was the viewpoint of a neurotypical person having almost a negative connotation of that ADHD label. Whereas for me, as somebody who learned about my ADHD later on in life and all the baggage that comes with the negative thoughts about myself and what I can do, I wish I had have known a lot sooner when I was younger so that I could have, worked with it. And so what do you think? Is there a balance to strike there between learning early and being well informed as the child themselves? What would you say on that?
Yeah, I love that question. I would say I want to start with saying something that I say frequently to ND job seekers and professionals for the most part, which is that we're not the problem, right? Like we exist, our differences are naturally occurring, and the world of school, work, community life was built without all minds in mind, right? So I ideally, in a perfect world, I would say that we shouldn't have to need labels. However, and also I'm empathetic and understand a parent saying, well, they're going to carry that label their whole life. They might use it as a crutch, or it might be limiting to them. And that's true because in my own experience, I didn't get a lot of opportunities that, let's say, my neurotypical sister got simply because, I had this label literally on my paperwork in school, right? So I understand that, but at the same time, identity is super, super important. Being able to feel seen and say, I'm sure that it was an aha moment for you when you're looking at the bullet points and saying, I fit this. This is me, and there's a reason why I struggle in certain areas and excel in others, right? It's also the way, in the world that as it exists right now, it's the way that we get understanding, flexibility, accommodations, etc. So I see it as important. And I do know a lot of ND adults that said, my parents knew that I was, let's say, autistic when I was 5 years old, and they didn't tell me, and I didn't get services through a traditional route because they were concerned about how that label would follow me and limit me. And I've never met anybody who was happy about that, you know? So what we always say at Potentia in the work context is we want to, whenever possible, and while identities and labels can be important and empowering, et cetera, but whenever possible, we want to learn the lesson and lose the label. And what that means to us is that not everyone has the psychological safety or level of comfort, basically, to disclose to their employer. A research by understood.org said that only 59% of employees, or 59% of employees, feel like it would not go well if they disclosed their different way of thinking, learning, working, communicating with their employer, right? But they have needs. And so this was true for me. I need, as an example, I need noise canceling headphones. I should be able to say, hey, manager, I need noise canceling headphones, and not have to share my ADHD card or my dyslexia card for a screen reader or anything else. If we set up the world through, inclusive design, universal design, to be supportive and flexible and encourage autonomy, you should be able to ask for what you need without having to provide some sort of an excuse, right? The other side of that is just because you know my label, so hi, I'm Dave. People know within the first 30 seconds, you could just Google me. I have ADHD, dyslexia, sensory processing disorder. You should not make any additional assumptions about me because of that. So ADHD is poorly named. I am dialed in with you right now, right? You should not make an assumption about my abilities or lack thereof, my strengths, my perspectives, my opinions, besides me just sharing that label with you. It comes with follow-up questions of, okay, what does that mean for you? What do you need? How can I support, et cetera? A lot of ideas around people with, let's say, ADHD or autism are common threads, but not always at all. I know people think of autistic people, let's say, as process-driven and great at math, right? And I know a lot of people that are process-driven and very literal and good at math, right?
But I also,
right, which by the way is not about an autistic person. It's about someone with a traumatic brain injury that it was based on a true story, but not an autistic person at all. So even our stereotypical ideas are misinformed. But anyway, I know autistic people that are stand-up comedians, tour guides, that have incredible strengths that do not fit those bullet points that we usually think of, because we all have biases that we carry, right? I know that's an ugly word, but it's true, based on movies we've seen and neighbors we have and experiences we've had, et cetera. They're not all true at all. The thing about neurodiversity is that we challenge the status quo of what it means to have a brain and be human and have ideas. And, so whenever possible, in short, we like to learn the lesson and lose the label in an ideal world.
I like that. And yeah, I think in terms of coming to it, understanding what ADHD was before it was suggested that I had it, like it was just something I didn't know much about, but it was, it was a label that was negative. And then it's amazing because I never, I only have one brain. I've only ever lived inside one head, and I've never felt limited, let's say, in what my brain can do. But I was just finding challenges of not reaching where I felt that I could, my true potential, and sort of understanding that it was ADHD. Whilst throughout my life, I've, worked on specific things, in specific areas, and had certain levels of success at doing that. They weren't all connected. And until I found the ADHD part, that really connected everything and allowed me to understand what was going on inside, and explaining all the different things that had occurred during my life. You mentioned that you worked with kids in foster care when you were a bit younger in your earlier career. I wonder, I don't know if you mentioned, but how did you actually get into that? Was that a push-pull situation in terms of, was it, I mean, I think you mentioned that a lot of those kids were neurodiverse yourself. So was it by accident that you fell into that, or did you sort of strategically make that move?
To be completely honest, I came out of college as kind of an optimist, a tragic optimist, an idealist, right? So, feel good about the future, know we need to change it, feel kind of negative about how things are going now, know that there's a lot of pain and difficulty in the world, know that there's a lot of historically marginalized and underserved, underrepresented, undersupported groups in the world, of which I was very much a part of. And so I left school thinking I just wanted to help people. And I knew that, to get my foot in the door, to be doing anything significant, the most important thing is to have the foundation of supporting those people directly and kind of paying your dues in that regard. So I really didn't care about the population. I didn't really care which population I was working with, whether it was people facing houselessness in New York City or, people with various disabilities, et cetera. I found myself working with teenagers in foster care, most of whom had criminal records or were in court for some sort of legal complication. And I needed it just as much as those teenagers needed it. I was tasked with travel training, helping teenagers navigate the city, which, according to New York City, was one of the things that we were supposed to do. But I was supporting 14-year-old gang-affiliated teenagers that knew how to navigate the city better than I could. And I was tasked with teaching them how to iron, and I didn't know how to iron. Frankly, my almost 7-year-old daughter can tie her shoes a little bit better than I can, or a little bit faster than I can, right? So I have my struggles. And so, and also it helped me communicate under pressure and on my feet, because a lot of these kids that I was working with have incredible survival skills. They're very, they exude confidence. They're able to navigate very complicated situations, right? And so it was kind of a boot camp for me in how to be a leader, how to be an ally, how to be an adult. So it was really impactful for me. But yeah, I just kind of honestly just fell into it.
And part of that sounded like there was an element of accountability there. You were in a situation where you were supposed to be helping them, but they were sort of helping you. And, with ADHD particularly, that accountability element, if you're responsible for somebody else, it means that you're more attentive to getting it done yourself, or serving others is an easier thing to do than necessarily look after yourself.
Absolutely. Yeah, I would never have gained some of the experiences or the skills or the perspectives or found a lot of my strengths had it not been for being tasked with something really important, which is, these young people are at the intersection, a major intersection of life, an inflection point, where it's very common for them to end up in prison or caught up in the mental health system, et cetera, if you don't provide the proper support and really serve as kind of a rock in their life. So I took that very, very seriously. And you're right, I wouldn't have done many of the things that I did and gained those things for myself had it not been for those individuals, for sure. I 100% see what you're saying there. That's a great point.
And you also mentioned imposter syndrome when you were calling up those Fortune 500 companies. I think you said that you had never applied for jobs there yourself, but then you found yourself in a situation where they were saying, "Oh, we really need your help." I just wonder, with that imposter syndrome, had you found to that point that maybe there was this potentially, not a glass ceiling in the traditional sense, but like I would never be able to apply or work there. And how did you find yourself? Was it sort of validating to find that feedback was that they genuinely, you were able to provide value to them?
Yeah, of course. So, came into adulthood feeling like I was that less than and very much an other, right? And so, and this kind of gets into my work with Potentia and the recruiting element. A large amount of potential top contributors, including me and maybe you and many other ND thinkers, self-select out of the application process before they even try, right? And before they even click submit, right? And that's because the world of work is a very rigid and cookie cutter copy paste environment. And for some, some of that is for very good reason. There's reasons for stuff. When you're talking about a company with 300,000 employees that operates on 6 continents, I mean, there's reasons why it's complicated and there's a lot of paper and a lot of boxes to check off, right? But, seeing the confidence in corporate employees and seeing the expectations, many of which are very vague, things like must be proficient in Excel. I use Excel every day, but I don't use it for math. I have no business doing payroll. I use it for organizing contacts or schedules or something like that. So what does must be proficient in Excel mean, right? They need to be more clear with that, or must be a strong communicator. I very much identify as being a strong communicator today, but I didn't then. But again, what does that mean, right? Does it, for someone that is applying at a big corporation to be in cybersecurity, and chances are that job description says must be a strong communicator. Meanwhile, many of your potential top contributors for that role do not identify themselves as strong communicators, right? But maybe it just means in close communication with a small team day to day on Slack or on Microsoft Teams or whatever. And it doesn't mean that you're going to be giving tours. It doesn't mean you'll have to host a podcast. It doesn't mean you're going to be expected to give a TEDx talk, right? So those kind of vague elements of the world of work, of what it means to be a corporate professional, were very intimidating to me. And I one of my favorite things to do when I get to speak to some of these companies is, once I've kind of won them over at around this time in the conversation, when hopefully they understand what the kind of value I might be able to add when Potentia Workforce is working with these companies, is that I say, just so you know, I never would apply to this company. And they kind of are taken aback and say, but why, Dave? We like you. We want to bring you in, right? And I mean, no one wants to be gatekeepy and limit people that could be great contributors, right? But it absolutely happens, and it happened to me.
Yeah,
for sure.
I mean, when you said that phrase, self-selecting yourself out of jobs, I mean, that really struck a chord with me, because I mean, in my last job, I was probably there for a total of about 11 or 12 years, and I never once, I can't remember going into a meeting to ask for a pay rise, or really, if I looked at getting a different job, I stayed there because I was looking at job applications, and I just thought, well, I know I could really do this. But then there was one part on the job application that I think, well, I don't have any evidence of that, so I best not apply. And then when you work, when you work with clients, and then you meet people in similar roles, equivalent roles that you might be looking to get, you think, I could be doing what they can do. But when it comes to the application process itself, you just think, no. And I suppose that could be like the rejection sensitivity dysphoria. You're just afraid that somebody's going to call you out, and you'll be found out. You can't do these things, but aren't we all just?
Yeah. And about rejection sensitivity, I mean, when I hear the term rejection sensitivity dysphoria, I think of chemical. I think of the way my brain operates, just like my ADHD, my dyslexia, or anything else, right? But a lot of that is socially constructed, and for good reason, that ND job seekers and professionals are sensitive to rejection. If I'm rejected from most things that I've wanted to do, from the time I'm a kid until the time that I'm 30, right? Like then it's an evidence-based belief, right? It's been reinforced over and over again. So it takes the world of work and employers to mitigate that and to screen people in rather than screening them out, to invite people in and say, we understand you're not the problem, that we want to do better. You know what I mean?
And quite often, my experience of seeing job postings, job listings being written, can be very rarely written by the people that actually you will work for. It's like a recruitment person or somebody who's a bit more operations based. And so it can be like a cut and paste job listing anyway. So they're not really familiar with what they're asking you to do. So it seems actually silly that it should put you off from applying. But I was listening to a podcast recently. There's a guy called Danny Wallace, and he wrote a book that brought us the film, the Jim Carrey film Yes Man, and it was telling the interviewer how he applied for a university, and it was like a media studies course. And he had the interview, and they were really pleased with him, but he had to do this written assignment. And he wrote it in a particular way that wasn't what they wanted. And so they rejected him, and they said, no, you didn't write it how we wanted to. So unfortunately, you haven't made it. And he disagreed with them. He wrote back and said, no, actually, I am perfect for this course. And I've written now what you wanted to, but I didn't. I did it this way, the other way, because I felt that was more me. And they said, oh, okay, so yeah, you can come on the course. And that was that. But it just struck me as, wow, the self ways. Would I have envisaged myself doing that? Taking no for an answer. I don't know if I would have been able to do that, but that seemed very, very courageous. But
I wouldn't have. I wouldn't have felt that psychological safety to do that. But I do want to say that just shows, and that person sounds like they were a huge value add to that organization, right? So we want to give people, again, there's lots of great reasons why the world of work can be a rigid place. And sometimes there are immovable objects in the way of it being fully flexible and fully supportive, right? But whenever possible, we want to give people autonomy over how they get things done, right? So that person's first assignment that they submitted likely checked all of the boxes. It just didn't check the boxes in the exact way that, or it accomplished kind of the key takeaways that employer needed to judge that person, but maybe didn't fit the exact template that they were asking for or looking for. That should be okay, right? And I'm not saying that if you are asking for someone to get payroll done and they do an interpretive dance instead, that should be okay. Like, again, we need to make sure that there's alignment between, and a great understanding and plenty of context over what needs to be accomplished, why it needs to be accomplished, no matter what your role in a company is, how your unique role fits into the bigger picture of the company's why and what you're trying to accomplish. And then, but then wherever possible, give as much autonomy and flexibility and understanding over how people get things done. I am very lucky to work at a somewhat small company that really understands neuroinclusion, right? So I do things in a way that would make a lot of people, and do make a lot of people, dizzy when I have to kind of open up my desk or show the vulnerability of sharing my screen and showing that I've been doodling for a whole meeting, whereas other people have been taking meticulous notes, right? But that's how I work. And if you let me show you, and that's another thing, we need to let people show you what they have to contribute. If you let me show you how I work best, I'm going to deliver, right? So I really like that. I really like that example. That's great.
Well, I'm now imagining you doodling the choreography to the interpretive dance of payroll. It suggested. I think I would pay money to see that show rather than actually work a day in payroll.
If I was the choreographer, it would be a very sad and perhaps violent dance, because that is something that I would really struggle to wrap my head around accomplishing.
So you mentioned the company that you work at. So let's talk about Potentia Workforce for a little while then. So tell us a bit about what they do and what you do specifically there on a day-to-day.
Yeah. So I'm the director of strategic programs for Potentia Workforce. That basically means that I help to design all of our service offerings based on my own many years of experience within the neurodiversity employment movement, based on research, based on keeping my ear close to the ground with the latest things happening in the practice of neuro-inclusive employment. And bringing in other perspectives, because, while I am ND myself, I certainly don't represent everybody, right? So I help shape our service offerings and deliver those to large corporations. And so I know I explained earlier that Potentia, we work globally with companies through training, coaching, consulting, and recruiting. But I can dig a little bit deeper into that. So over the past 10 years or so at, again, some of the world's biggest companies, the first kind of being Microsoft, SAP, Ernst & Young, a few other companies, started originally what was called Autism at Work initiatives, and quickly were renamed Neurodiversity at Work initiatives. And so our STARS program, which is what one of our two major services is called, kind of takes from that, emulates it, builds on it, and helps other companies do the Neurodiversity at Work kind of hiring initiative thing. So basically, it's 3 steps. It's training teams, recruiting new talent, and providing ongoing support. So in training teams, we're identifying dedicated teams that, in collaboration with the organization, we've identified as uniquely suited to bring on, proactively put people in seats and bring on ND talent, but we want to train them and make sure that the managers and mentors and circles of support there are up to speed, that the job descriptions are optimized, like we spoke about already, that they have great interview processes that focus on strengths and aren't these like archaic, kind of unfair cookie cutter processes, figuring out communications, project management, and just in general training teams on how to be better managers, better allies, better colleagues, before recruiting ND talent. And what we see is usually a couple people raise their hand and say, well, I'm part of this program because I haven't said anything yet, but I'm ND myself, which gets us into our kind of second area of services. But to finish up STARS for a moment, so then we proactively recruit talent for these roles at these companies. We help be that bridge between the company and the candidate through strengths-based interviewing and some projects. So again, letting the candidate show you what they're capable of or what their potential is, right? And then we support the onboarding process and provide talent coaching in the months following those beginning stages for not just that ND new hire, but to their teams as well, to make sure that the practices and philosophies that we've shared with the company stick and that everything's working. We have a great rate of success with that. So we do that globally on 4 continents as of right now. And again, with some of the largest companies in the world, energy companies like Chevron, banks like AIG, PNC Bank, entertainment companies, tech companies, and it's gone really, really well. The other part that I alluded to was our other major service called Empower, and that is working to improve the employee experience of the employees you already have. So not just, whereas the STARS program gets people in the door, that's great. It helps that immediate team and helps those individuals. It also provides a case study for what wider neuroinclusion at that company looks like, right? Empower is that wider scoped program of improving overall talent acquisition, interview processes, and then employee experience, career pathing, um, helping to install, manage, facilitate employee resource groups, talking about communication, not just team communication, which is absolutely included, but also communications at the company, like internal communications departments, external, how you're talking about neurodiversity, how you're addressing it, what you're doing on April 1st for Autism Awareness Month or whatever. And also how neuroinclusive are your communications. All different, Empower checks a lot of boxes and is very highly customized, but it acknowledges the fact, and this is fairly new, we're probably one of the first programs to really be focusing on this, rather than just putting new people in seats, to be focusing on the wider company and acknowledging again that there are tons of ND professionals already working in these big companies, and we should be making sure that they're engaged and that they feel like they belong and that they're productive and stay a long time, and you're unlocking and leveraging their strengths, right? So that's Empower. So those are our two major areas of focus. I know I'm throwing a lot at you, and when I'm excited, I talk really fast. So feel free to ask me to zoom in or repeat myself if you'd like.
Well, I've just been jotting some things down, and I can't talk and jot at the same time. I do have some questions about what you said. So I think this is, I understood this correctly, but you said that you identify uniquely suited companies that are in a good position to take on neurodiverse employees. So if I understand that correctly, what makes a company uniquely suited to that?
That's a great question. So I do think that I can answer that one, but what I think I said and what I meant was teams at companies that are uniquely suited. So but essentially it's the same thing. I mean, companies have core values, they have goals, they have areas of focus that make them more suited to so for something like our STARS program, there is a big stereotype of neurodiversity in tech, and that's where all the jobs should be. We want to push against that, but at the same time, there are a lot of ND job seekers that want to be in tech, and there are a lot of tech needs at these big companies. One of the really great things about recruiting for tech is that there's a lot of jobs that are similar. So like they're hiring 50 cybersecurity professionals at the same time or something like that. So you're able to look at that job description, work with those particular managers on that particular team, as opposed to, let's say, the one position for corporate art curator for an entire international bank, right? So there is some benefit there. So looking at, what kind of roles need to be filled, what their talent needs are, what their values are, where they're trying to be, what pain points are they seeing? Are they seeing issues around employee productivity, engagement, retention, innovation? Are they just reinventing the wheel over and over? And then figuring out where in the company these programs might sit. And by the way, at a big company like, let's say, Chevron, we'll be doing 5 or 6 of these programs at once internationally, in different areas. So slowly, these resources and these ideas, philosophies, best practices are kind of spreading through osmosis at a company as they make their programs larger and more mature.
Mm-hmm. One thing that strikes me when you're looking at job roles within a company, what's happening now when you're going into a company and helping them become more suited to neurodiverse candidates? Are you looking at like traditional job roles that maybe a neurodiverse person with specific neurodiversities will be really good at some elements of it, but the traditional job role would have said, oh yeah, but there's also this part of it which is particularly challenging for them? What happens when you sort of suggest they're not going to be that, they're going to be really challenged by that. How well do the companies adapt at saying, okay, well, what do you do with that bit? Do they take it and give it to somebody else?
Mhm.
How do we build the role around them, and how comfortable are companies in being flexible in that way?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. I would call that job carving, like carving the role to the individual rather than carving the individual to the role, right? And so I haven't fit a job description in about 15 years for myself. I've had the distinct honor of writing my own job descriptions for the past 4 or 5 roles that I've had, and I can't really picture it being another way. That if I'm being completely honest. I would say that I would never look. I could look at a job description right now, tell you ways that you can improve it, but I would never dare say this won't be good for an ND professional, or this won't be good for an autistic professional or an ADHD professional, because again, in our philosophy of learning the lesson and losing the label, right? We don't know what we don't know, right? So some people might fit that job perfectly. Just like some people benefit from having a bureaucratic manager rather than a democratic manager, right? Like, we have our preconceived ideas of what a meaningful workplace experience or a great contributor at work might look like, but those are probably wrong, right? So I'd say that that's on a case-by-case basis. I do 100% see what you see and understand what you're saying. Like, let's say the job is for administrative assistant for a C-level executive at a company, and we have someone with experience doing that, maybe on a smaller scale, but didn't have the requirement of booking travel and events for that person and isn't comfortable doing that, right? Is there somebody else within the org that could take on that role? We 100% have those conversations. But we also want to, I didn't know what I was capable of until I was given a shot. So we also want to challenge people to learn and to grow and to step out of their comfort zone just a little bit, never without a robust safety net of support, right? So we don't want to throw people to the wolves by any means, but we do want to help people come out of that job experience stronger and better than they ever were, right? There are still limitations to that. I am not going to take on a job where I have to do payroll. I have my limits, right? So I understand why there's limitations there, but also we want to think wide open about this and make it very person-centered and case by case.
I see what you're saying in terms of every person is different. Just if you've met one person with ADHD, you've met one person with ADHD, and I think you mentioned earlier in some of the things that you do. You teach companies or coach people on process-driven aspects of their of what they do, and I myself, I was obsessed with process in my last job, but that's was born out of the fact that I was very bad and disorganized at that. So I needed to build a framework around myself to help me move forward. And I'm thinking of a future guest that I've got on she is actually helps digitally organize people's computers and their digital space and helps people organize their homes. And she has ADHD, and it's literally like a masking thing. You obsess about the things that you're weakest at, and then it becomes a thing that you have to keep, such a tight leash on that it becomes something that you're quite knowledgeable about. So yeah, you could never really anticipate what somebody can or can't do until you find out.
Yeah, I would also say that give yourself a little bit more credit, because I 100% identify with the disorganized thing. I'm part of the messy desk club. I don't know about you, but like I'm the person that if my wife texts me and asks me if we have any paper clips, and I'll say it's under my desk in the corner of the room, and I know where this one thing, it's my mess and I own it and I need it. And it's somewhat functional for me. But if I'm given like, and I'm tempted to do this. I haven't done it in a while, but if I block my calendar and say on July 15th, I'm going to block my day. I have these tech tools I want to check out. I have these drawers I need to clean out, and I need to revamp my work systems. I despite identifying as a messy, disorganized guy, I have a good visual brain. And I don't know if it's dyslexia or ADHD or what it is, but I can design and map out what might work, right? And I think one of the big things for me is to make peace with the fact that, some people contact me and say, how did you overcome this trait, like disorganization or lack of concentration or whatever, to be able to perform at the level that you perform at? And I say, it's never over. I didn't just accomplish this thing. It's something that's evolving. It's nuanced. It's complicated. And so just because I spend that 8 hours on July 15th blocking my day to, download these AI tools and rearrange my desk and my desktop and my drawers and whatever, doesn't mean that I'll stick with it, but it's still a step in the right direction. And I'll still gain the immediate 3-week benefit of having done that. Right. So I'd say give yourself some grace and some more credit, because, our minds might not work in conventional ways, but they certainly work.
It reminded just the example that you gave there about organizing by looking into softwares and stuff. It reminds me, recently I started building myself a second brain. This concept of a digital space that stores everything, but it's more link based than it is putting things in folders, which if you start building folders, then you quickly build too many folders in too many levels. So I've been going through quite a few frameworks to try and feel like I'm getting some organization back. You mentioned, I'm quite interested to know what the trend is at the moment in terms of, are you seeing an uptick in companies wanting to be, more neurodiverse aware or more inclusive? Sorry. Also, you mentioned that you're global as well, and I wonder if you're seeing any patterns in different countries taking to it more so than others.
Definitely. Okay, 2-part question. So, the answer to your first question as to level of interest or investment in becoming more neuro-inclusive organizations, the short answer is absolutely. That there are all different ways of getting at this, but the fact is that this stuff needs to be acknowledged. And I'd say ever since around March of 2020, people have been much more open about what makes them different, about what, their sensitivities, their need for work and things like that. And so there are tons of late identified professionals that are already within those organizations that need to be acknowledged, like yourself, right? And so absolutely. In mid-July, I will be speaking at a major conference in Las Vegas, representing a roundtable, the Neurodiversity at Work roundtable, which is companies like Microsoft and Dell and IBM and Chevron and others. I will be speaking to a room full of employers that are not doing anything around this stuff yet, and really look forward to trying to sell them on this idea that this stuff is happening with or without you. Your companies will be better because of it. It's the right thing to do, but it's also the very, very smart thing to do. And so, yes, we're seeing definitely an ever upward trajectory of interest and investment and understanding that this is stuff that needs to be addressed. As far as globally, I mean, even nationally, there's all different approaches and philosophies to understanding what it means to think differently, especially within the employment context. We work in South America, we work in Asia, we work in Europe, we work in the US, in Australia. And so we do see very different approaches and levels of understanding across borders and belief systems and legal frameworks, etc. And it to me, I want to be, just like I want to be empathetic with every employer, that everyone has to start somewhere, and as long as you're well-meaning, it's a great place to start. Let's do something, right? To me, I want to be very empathetic because people are raised in the environments where they're raised in. You don't know what you don't know, and we're coming at things from different perspectives, different angles, different experiences. But it's a little bit like stepping into a time machine in certain places where the language around, like if you Google neurodiversity and then a certain country name, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the only things you find so far are on Reddit by people at home looking for ADHD treatment in a country where they don't give stimulants, or looking for we forget about employment opportunities. I mean, this is just getting started. Or you hear things like, my child has been struck with the illness of autism or dyslexia or something like that. And those are things that we see. Whereas we work with a lot of multinational companies that are doing something in the US, or they're doing something in Australia, which has a pretty, a great mindset for this stuff. And they're saying, well, why not in this other place, right? And so we have buy-in from that employer, and now we need to get buy-in from the wider, figure out how to make that work for that area. And so we've actually had to kind of, if you with a 99.9% level of confidence that if you're putting out a recruiting flyer for a recruiting program in a certain country, that's going to be the first time that that person reads the word neurodiversity, then you need to accomplish a lot on that flyer, right? Like you need to say what neurodiversity is, that it's not a bad thing, that this is a big, exciting new concept. And not only that, now that we have you there, these companies want you. If you were to tell me, if I was an adult 30 years ago when I was in elementary school, if I was an adult instead, and you had told me that in the early 90s, right, I would not have believed you. That would not be a concept that people understood, right? So it's been very interesting to figure out how to make it work in other places. And every country is different, just like every company is different, right? But it's definitely been a humbling experience to remember that we're still, despite me being within it, sometimes I forget what it's like on the outside of this echo chamber that I'm very lucky to be a part of. So it's humbling to remember that despite all this energy and excitement and new clients and things like that, that we're really just getting started. In fact, I don't know when this will air, but next week, Potentia Workforce is going to be having a event called Neurodiversity Around the Globe, where we share guests from one of our director of operations is from Costa Rica, and she helps us run the programs in countries all over the world. So her perspective, as well as somebody from India and somebody from Germany, sharing what neuroinclusion looks like in their country, where things are going, what they need, what's going well, what people could take from what they're where they're at. So that's very exciting. That's on June 27th.
I'm since I've started doing these interviews, I haven't yet found an effective way to remember all the links that get mentioned in the conversation. But I've made a note of that one, so hopefully I will remember, and
I'll shoot it over to you
and edit it in time to get it out. I want to put a skeptical hat on and play devil's advocate here with sort of multinational companies and the trend of being neurodiverse, aware, and inclusive. Do you find that maybe there is a perception that this will look good if we start doing this, and that maybe they're just sort of ticking boxes, so it looks good to be a neurodiverse employer, or and if that is the case, how do you mitigate against that to make sure that these concepts do really take seed and really support the people that you're putting into those jobs?
Yeah, I understand. And there's definitely, we don't see it with our customers because our clients, it just wouldn't work out. We have a fairly high level of expectation in ensuring that people are doing the work that they're taking credit for, that our integrity of our programs are on the line. And we've also never had, not to toot my own horn, but toot, right? We've never had an unsuccessful program. I mean, once we get people to listen, once you put us in a room with the key stakeholders in this and get them to understand the reasons why we're doing this, it goes well. Like, people get motivated around this stuff and they'll do the work. There is definitely, like I had alluded to earlier, there's all different ways to get at this thing. And there is definitely like a certain level of performative element to people like good stories. They like impact stories, and they like success stories, and they like, autistic professional overcomes the odds. But like, no, we want to change the odds, right? So there's all different ways to get at this, and there are companies. It is no secret that companies need to get started somewhere. Within a year, if I Google the name of a Fortune 500 company with the word neurodiversity and nothing comes up, then there's a problem. I don't think that that'll be true in a year. You know what I mean? With the way things are moving forward. But whether you're going to, whether internally or finding a third party, partner like Potentia to do this, or you're going to pay the biggest influencer you can find to fly across the world to give a 1-hour talk for the same amount of money that we'd be charging. That's up to the individual. And I would say I want to give people empathy and grace there, because it's still a step in the right direction. It's better than absolutely nothing. If you speak something into existence, then you have to do something about it. So even if they are doing that first step as finding the biggest influencer they can find and fly them across the world, maybe that's because it'll get them those press, and maybe that'll hold their feet to the fire to actually do the thing, right? Like, so, does that all make sense?
Yeah. Well, the last thing you said feels a little bit like the idea of this podcast itself is like, well, I put myself out there and said I was going to do this, so now it's out there. I've got to keep going. So it's a really good motivator.
Yeah, you got to commit to the bit, man.
Yeah. So tell me about the TED Talk, which is titled "Rebranding the Brain: Neurodiversity at Work." So, well, there's a couple of things about that. I mean, what was the experience like of doing the TED Talk itself? But and then let's go into the content of it as well.
Sure. So I've been giving trainings and workshops in various capacities for many years. We're all good at something different, and I tend to be very extroverted and excited and passionate around things that interest me and things that I'm invested in. This is absolutely that thing for me. So if it was about real estate or something like that, I would not be an engaging speaker. I would not be confident on the stage, but I tend to kind of thrive in that environment. That was actually my second one. I gave another one in 2019 with a partner that went fairly well, but it was more his thing. He's an autistic colleague of mine. But this new one was kind of a redemption for that, because it took me about 10 years of working in the field of neurodiversity employment to finally actually talk about my brain and the way it works. So I gave my first TEDx talk with a partner, kind of pointing to him and saying, yeah, this guy, because I lacked that, despite working in the field, I lacked that psychological safety and comfort level to start talking about my brain and the way it worked. So that changed the month after I stepped off the stage for the first time, and I've never turned back ever since 2019. And my confidence and my abilities to communicate these ideas, et cetera, have multiplied probably tenfold since then. And so this one was me making that one right. I don't address it directly, but how I come out onto the stage is saying, okay, icebreaker time. I'm Dave. I have and a fun fact about me is that I have ADHD, dyslexia, sensory processing disorder, and left-right confusion, and I show my tattoos. And that's because I want to lead with who I am. You know what I mean? And so it was professionally very beneficial for me, but personally very gratifying to be able to get up there and share my truth And for me not to own that, TEDx owns it, and it's going to be on Google for the rest of my life. So whether I want to or not, it's out there, and that's very liberating for me. And then, just, you're given 12 minutes to share whatever you want to share with the world. And I have a lot to share. So it's a very high level talk that I wanted to distill down a lot of big concepts into their bare parts and their key components, and do that in an engaging way. So there's a few like little rhymes in there, or alliteration, like I already told you, learn the lesson, lose the label. That's in there. Or getting what you need to be set up for success should be normal, not formal, right? Which is to say that accommodations processes and success enablers should be kind of streamlined and stuff. But, trying to make people leave with things that are stuck in their head and actionable ideas that they can bring home or back to work with them was a really cool experience. And I've gotten a lot of great feedback about it, and a lot of great opportunity because of it. So I'm proud of it.
Well, you've touched on a question that I actually wanted to ask you, and it sort of leans into the concept of TED Talks anyway, because you are there on stage storytelling, and it struck me that the power of storytelling is really important. Like you said, the alliteration, it helps a message sink in, and I think, for somebody with ADHD, if you're like me and you're coming to it later on in life, you're arriving at it because you're struggling with something. Then you get this deluge of information, and it's all useful, but it's overwhelming, and you really don't know where to start. And I found that trying to come up with stories or breaking things down into something memorable is really important to help navigate what it is that explains what it is in a metaphor, or it explains the process by likening it to something else. Really then makes that easier to make those next few steps through that, because we've evolved with this storytelling technique. So, how important do you find storytelling in what you do?
Yeah, that's a great question. I was just at a conference a few weeks ago where we talked about how sometimes, how someone explained it back to me when I didn't use such concise language, is that sometimes research informs practice, or research should inform practice, but also practice should inform research, right? And right now in the neurodiversity employment space, practice is often ahead of research. Same with experience. Like, people need to understand the kind of qualitative experience of the ND professional within, the world of work. That helps illustrate what this looks like IRL, right? In real life. And so there's nothing to me that's more effective than raw first person perspectives, the good, the bad, and the ugly. People get a lot out of that, and people tend to get a lot out of mine, but I want to always make sure to verbalize that, just like how our stories are very different, but your late identification story is equally important to mine. I only have one story, and we should be amplifying the voices of as many diverse perspectives and neurotypes, et cetera, as possible. I think distilling things down into a story with a actionable idea or lesson learned is a very effective tool of getting buy-in from people on being more neuroinclusive, but also, like you said, making people feel more seen, heard, understood with their own lived experience. And we're seeing a lot of that with late identified adults, where they're saying, I listened to your podcast, I'm sure for you, or I listened to your talk and I felt like it was me talking, right? I mean, it can be so empowering to find parallels in your stories, and to learn how people overcame certain challenges and things like that. So yeah, really, really important, and something I'm passionate about for sure. A challenge for me, because one of my traits tends to be that my run-on sentences have run-on sentences attached to them, and my side stories have side stories. But as long as I'm making sure people are with me, I think that I can add value in that department.
Is that what you meant by? Because I saw a recent LinkedIn post that you did. ADHD is learning how to use parentheses and brackets at a young age. And then you've got in brackets, since to use more context equals better, and then in more brackets because of how we're wired. And that just reminds me of every time I'm having a conversation with somebody, like over a beer or something, I'll be thinking of the context of what I'm saying and think, well, I have to lay the groundwork for that context now. So it's a sidestep. And when I have these conversations with my mum, it's exactly the same mirrored back at me. And it's like, it's insane.
Yeah. Definitely over-explainer is a thing for me. And I think that that's partially because that's what I want from other people. Maybe I don't always need it, but providing as much context as possible in as many mediums as possible is really important. Some people would rather bring home a 300-page manual and read it over the weekend on how to work a new computer system or something. Some people are going to watch the 90-second YouTube video or read the Wikipedia. Some people are just going to figure it out themselves, but having that context available is really important. But also, it's almost like a defense thing. So it's like, in case they think I don't care, here's why. Or in case they think I made the wrong decision, here's why, right? So it's not a very conscious thing for me, but I think it serves those functions. And yeah, I mean, if you want context, I'll give it to you. You know what I mean? Like that is a very natural tendency for me to do in communication and conversation.
Well, the way you put that, it made a penny drop for me then. Like, I over explain because that's how I need information back to me. And I've often found that if I'm working on a new project or something, something, a task is being given to me, but they just tell me the first step, I'm like, no, I need to know where this ends before I can start. I need to see the edges before I can really get into it. I mean, it often leads to overwhelm, but I still feel that I need to know everything before I start. Because I had that aha moment just then while you were talking, it reminds me of I was in San Francisco a few years ago, and on this topic of storytelling, I went to a talk about evolution and storytelling, and the lady that was talking mentioned that there is like this chemical reaction that happens when we have an aha moment or when things fall into place. And that got me thinking that aha moment or that chemical release might be akin to what we see in biology or reproduction. The reason we reproduce is because we're driven by the result. The payoff is an orgasm at the end of sex, and we survive. But that mental orgasm is the aha moment, because we get so fueled by curiosity and learning more and making sense of everything. Is probably what has made humans learn so much or keep questioning why, in order to make sense of everything, and why we keep progressing.
Yeah.
So have a mental orgasm.
I agree with you 100%. I don't know how much I have to contribute to it, but I agree. To me, from my perspective, there's not many better feelings than like synapses firing, your brain working at its optimal level, which happens to me a few times a week, and I have absolute euphoria around that. And then also making connections and working things out, solving problems, learning new information that colors things in and makes it all make sense. I mean, there's only a few moments that match that, you know what I mean? And I want to share that feeling. I want to get other people there. I want to share that feeling with others, you know what I mean? Because it is something that I was not used to feeling until things started clicking for me within this specific field and area of interest, right? And I'll never get tired of it.
Mm. Just before we move on to the final sort of few questions, we mentioned the TEDx talk, but not really diving into the topic. Is there anything that you want to sort of pull out of that to share with the listeners?
Yeah. So, rebranding the brain. I mean, I had never used that term before I thought of the title. But I wanted it to be attention grabbing to people who have never heard of the word neurodiversity before, and getting people to understand that it's still the same brain, right? But that, we're looking at this a different way. And when you think about some of the biggest, like, kind of corporate rebrands and how effective they were, how you remember when that logo changed or when that mindset changed, or why don't they do those funny commercials with the cavemen anymore, whatever. Those are memorable things. So rebranding the brain was just kind of stem from that idea of, you have to remember that the TEDx audience is forever. It's not just the people in the room. It exists on the internet forever, and that everyone's in a different place in their journey towards understanding the concept that you're trying to put forth, right? So basically, it's just about, the fact that embracing and supporting neurodiversity isn't just really empowering for us as individuals, and it is, but it's also empowering for employers who are tasked with bringing together so many different people with so many different ways of thinking and learning and working and communicating, different beliefs, strengths, perspectives, challenges. And so kind of getting buy-in from everyone around this. And by the way, we're all part of neurodiversity, and that's mentioned in that talk. I mean, everyone has a different way of operating, right? And that adds to the kind of immense fabric that is, our collective, mother brain, right, as humans. And that's to our benefit. And then just some actionable steps that several of which I've kind of mentioned throughout our conversation to create a more neuro-inclusive world of work. Things like starting from psychological safety. Do I feel like, do your people feel like they are part of your team, that they can learn, seek support, make mistakes, contribute in meaningful ways, get credited properly for their work, and raise their hand, change the status quo, which is really, really important for ND thinkers. Learn the lesson, lose the label, which we already kind of talked about. Success enablers, which is kind of our broadening and rebranding of the idea of accommodations, which is to say that every single person needs something different to be set up for success at work, no matter how your brain operates. So normalizing that fact and inviting people to share what sets them up for success. And when you invite people and you kind of give them, a menu, and we have a very robust kind of program within our STARS recruiting program where we do this stuff with ND professionals and their teams. When you're invited to think about that stuff, you might be asking yourself questions that you've never asked yourself before, and it's very, very empowering to be invited to share that. So success enablers is a big topic. But overall, it's just getting buy-in around again, it was a high-level thing, a lot to accomplish in 12 minutes, but just getting buy-in under the understanding that neurodiversity is all of us. There's people that that might not even know yet or aren't telling you that they think differently. It might be you yourself. And there are also amazing people that are being sidelined and have been historically that you should want to be bringing into your companies. It was really those key concepts. And again, really, there's that, and then there's the personal, and it was sharing my personal story along with it, which you've all heard by now if you've listened to the whole episode. Weaving those two things together was really empowering and personally to me as well. So that's pretty much an overview of the talk.
Yeah. I think I'm right in saying that in the talk you use a term which I hadn't necessarily heard before, uh, am I right in saying that you use the term neurodistinct?
Hmm.
Um, and that got me to thinking about, because obviously if you're doing a rebranding, like in a traditional business sense, words are very important in a rebrand and messaging. So I just wonder, are there terms that you think that we should be using for things, or maybe terms that you don't think are very useful, and maybe are part of the reason why the branding we need a rebranding.
Yeah. I think like a lot of other things that I've mentioned, this is an individual choice. First of all, everyone should have autonomy over what their identity is, right? And that the interesting thing about neurodiversity is that it's been defined and it's been evolving collectively. There's no one gatekeeper person that decides what it means, even what it means to be neurodivergent or neurodistinct. Like some people think of it just as ADHD, autism, and dyslexia. And most people now think that it's way wider than that and includes acquired neurodiversity like PTSD, OCD, other mental health challenges, etc. So, it's definitely up to the individual and evolving. Um, just like neurodiversity as a concept is evolving, neurodivergent and neurodivergence has only been around for several years now, and uh, became quickly kind of the term du jour to describe someone with a highly unique operating system. And so we can still ask ourselves why, and ask ourselves, is that the best way to just describe it? For me, you'll hear me use neurodivergent and neurodistinct interchangeably, but Tim Goldstein, a friend from Google, who's an autistic thinker and a trailblazer in the space of neurodiversity at work, he coined the term neurodistinct because he thought that neurodivergent might sound like a deliberate rebellion away from the typical, like it's like a decision or a choice, or it might divergent might have like a negative connotation. And so he prefers neurodistinct. And neurodistinct to me sounds very neutral. It just sounds kind of like I have a very particular operating system, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I tend to use that. But I'm not, waving the flag, trying to change any minds necessarily. It can be a very, identity is a very personal thing, obviously. So I'm not gonna be the one to try to necessarily change any minds, but I think it's a great conversation to have and a great thing to consider. I will say that it's interesting because I know that we're from across the ocean from each other. Neurodiverse is still used commonly for people with a unique operating system, and especially I noticed in the UK it's used. But to me, not because of any political correctness thing, but just because of like the way language works, neurodiverse is kind of a misnomer because one person can't be diverse. Like, so we're all part of neurodiversity, just like we're all part of, you can't be, let's say a person of color is not a diverse person, right? Like only a group can be diverse. So I would say to get rid of that one, like that would be one thing that I kind of wave the flag on a little bit, just because I want people to understand that no matter how your brain works, you're part of neurodiversity. And that's a great thing that creates like buy-in and understanding from, the wider population. But I do hear it a lot. And so not out to get anybody about it, but it's just interesting to me because to me, just language wise, it just doesn't make sense. You know what I mean?
And I think for me, I mean, there's a lot of talk about, particularly in the UK, people talking about how long the waiting lists are to get diagnosed because there's been a rise in people looking for diagnosis. But it strikes me that the question needs to be asked, what if there's always been this many people with ADHD or any other neurodiverse challenges? And it's just, as I think we sort of said earlier, it's the environment that we've created. It's the society that we've created that has coined this neurotypical phrase. It's like before, the Industrial Revolution and people having to sit in classrooms to, be streamlined into different job roles. People were quite happily functioning because they did things out in the open and physically and everything without being told that they were, being aware that they were different to a typical. And I heard somewhere the other day, which I thought was really good, which is if you've got a plant and it's dying, then you don't blame the plant.
Right.
You change the environment, so you move it to a better room that's either got more sun or less sun, or you change the soil, or you feed it. You change the environment around it, and I think that's, the plant or the person is not broken. It's the environment that.
Right. Yeah. No, I mentioned earlier, we're not the problem, and that's a great that's a great metaphor to look at it with, right? 100%. That is. And a lot of the time when people are first getting started, they ask some questions that I love those questions. There's no such thing as stupid questions, but like, what do I do to make sure if I have an autistic employee, what do I do to make sure that they're doing their work, right? Like the framing is kind of like fixing the individual, or either accommodating or fixing or changing the individual, and not like you're looking at the wrong thing. You know what I mean? Like we're, just like you said, change the soil, change the sunlight, change the vitamins, change the, it's the same exact thing. Very cool.
Or remember to water it is often shit. Now I'm just aware of the time and sort of wrapping up, but I am determined to fit this in as a feature. I've imagined that I've created a wonderful feature that I've borrowed from another podcast that I think it's called My Mate Bought a Toaster, and it's about comedians showing the host what's inside their Amazon account, and they go back to like the very first days that they started using it, and they go, "Why did I buy that? No, that was a birthday present. I didn't buy that for myself." And it tells an interesting story about the person, which you might not usually get, because it's a little bit secret what it is in that Amazon account, if you think about it. And so for me personally, if I think about all the things, I mean, I'm an avid learner, and that's what gets me, is the curiosity, and I get driven by the novelty of new things. And I often think I could be this now, and I want to learn everything. And since online learning has taken off, I've got an Udemy account that is full of sort of unfulfilled dreams of things that I might have tried to pivot into. And I did ask you before the show if there was anything that you could reveal about yourself that in your vault of unfulfilled dreams, have you honestly thought, I'm going to do this, and it's lasted for 5 minutes?
Yeah. So, well, I'd say that they're still back there somewhere. Again, neurodiversity and employment is truly my passion and my special interest. So there are so many things that I want to do at work, that, like starting a podcast, like different kind of offerings and events and things like that I would love to do, that I have worked towards and that are in the draft phase somewhere in my Google Drive, but as far as beyond that, if I had more time, I dip my toes into the arts a little bit more. I'm a punk rock musician. I play punk rock guitar, bass, a little bit of drums, vocals. That's what I did instead of going to school. That's what I did. That's what I did as a teenager, and I'm still in touch with a lot of my friends who tour the world and sleep on floors still, despite being in their 40s. And so whenever I have time, I like to make music, and now I do it with my daughter, where we'll do covers of Twinkle Twinkle Little Star or something like that. So always want to
punk.
Yeah,
punk
no,
covers.
exactly. No, that's exactly what it is. So always want to have a lot of concepts for different records that I want to come out with eventually, just for me, not trying to be a rock star or anything, but throw it up on Spotify and see what happens, share it with my friends. So there's that. I like to, I live outside of Nashville now, and it's less true now, but in New York City, when I lived most of my life in New York City, there's a lot of great furniture on the side of the road because people move constantly. And so restoring or reworking or rebranding furniture has been a passion in the past, like, sanding it down, painting it fun, changing the handles on the drawers and things like that has always been really cool to me. Most of my favorite furniture in the house was free for whatever reason. So like even behind me, I have concrete blocks that were spray painted black with my daughter, and then just very simple pieces of wood from Home Depot that were stained. And like, I like the way it looks, and I think it's functional and it's fun. So I like little DIY projects like that. I'm no carpenter, but I like that stuff. Yeah, and just little art projects, ways of being creative, fitness trends and things like that I get into. Also, I lift weights a bit. So like trying to use those rubber band things instead of going to the gym all the time, things like that I'll order and then never touch again after a couple weeks. I definitely am a cereal starter for sure.
Yeah, I recently bought some parallel bars because I thought I was going to get into calisthenics and have like a body like a gymnast, but they've like more like doorstops at the moment. But yeah, it's interesting. Like a lot of the things that you mentioned there, obviously with the music and the furniture, it's a very creative thing. Which if we're going to look at it through an ADHD lens, is people with ADHD tend to be quite creative, and also you mentioned the fitness thing as well. We need to generate dopamine through movement because with that lack of dopamine. So it's funny how you're drawn to the things that almost like you need to get into. Like when a pregnant woman craves really odd things, it's because the baby's saying, I need it. And clearly I think, the ADHD inside of you, I need to create.
It's definitely scratching an itch for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think we need to looking at how we spoke about, I think we need to
we should do this again. Thank you so much.
Well,
I had a great time.
Well, now that you've revealed that you like punk rock and furniture making, we should do an episode on that.
Sure, I'm down.
Yeah, cool. All right. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me. I will endeavor to put all the links, the things that we've talked about in the show notes. I'll definitely put a link to the TEDx talk and to the Potentia Workforce website. But thank you so much. I've really enjoyed chatting to you, and I hope that the ND Around the Globe show goes very well.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it, man. And let's catch up soon.
All right. Take care. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Well, there we have it. Thank you so much for listening this far. If you want to hear more episodes, then please subscribe on YouTube or whatever podcast platform you use. It really helps to spread the word. So if you know anyone this episode could help, then please share it with your friends. If you want to follow me on social media, I am on Instagram at ADHD_goals, and you can find me on Facebook too. If you want to get in touch with the show, then you can email me at hello@adhdgoals.co. And finally, if you're struggling to manage your ADHD and you would like me to be your coach, then please head over to my website and get in touch. Until next time, bye for now.